Hello, and welcome everyone to the latest Credit Safe webinar. Today, I am really thrilled that we have two people who've become friends over the last 2 years while I've been here at Credit Safe, and two really wonderful women who are, deeply immersed in the commercial collection space. So I think it's going to be a really just interesting conversation. And I really can't wait to just kind of get their insights and figure out where we go. So before I do introductions, just a tiny bit of housekeeping. The first thing I want to say is that please ask questions during this panel discussion. There is a little Q&A button at the bottom. We very much look forward to your questions. I'm going to do my best to integrate them into this conversation as we go along. And the second thing I want to say is that this is all being recorded, and as with all of our webinars, we're going to do our best to post this to our YouTube channel as fast as possible. And for anyone who's registered, you should be seeing a link come into your inbox within the next day or two. So we're excited about that. So with that said, I really just want to get started and really welcome our two panelists. Welcome Annette and welcome Katie. So
hello. Thanks, Dustin. Always a pleasure.
So Annette Wagoner, you're the Executive Director of the Commercial Collections of America organization. And Katie Kike, I met you when you were with another company, but now I want to call you a consultant now. Hopefully that's right. Correct way. So you're a consultant, who's just deeply embedded in this collection industry. So really excited to have you both on. Annette, so I wanted just to start with you and just kind of, get this conversation kicked off where we talk about at the highest levels, like how are commercial collection companies being impacted by COVID-19? What are you hearing on the ground?
Well, thank you very much for having us, Dustin. I really appreciate the opportunity. A while back, I had the opportunity to hear General Stanley McChrystal speak to a group. For those of you that don't know who General McChrystal is, he was the face of the United States military in the 2000s in Afghanistan. And he taught a very, very poignant lesson. He said, when you want to get information, you don't go to your counterparts, the other generals, you go to the privates on the front line. So when you asked us to be part of this webinar, we went to our agencies, those people on the front line. And I asked them how to answer your question. And it ended up that we looked at two platforms, the impact of the placement of accounts and the impact on operations. So overall, the impact of the accounts, the placement of accounts has been slight so far. Commercial agencies knew that there was going to be a reduction of revenue when it came in, but not necessarily the reduction of placements. So that was kind of a question, right? So most of the agencies that responded to my question, they expressed that there has been minimal reduction of placements. Now, having said that, it really depends on the industry that the industries that they represent. Some industries have placed moratoriums on placements. So of course that impacted those agencies. So, well, some were impacted more than others. We see a minimal reduction in placements. Now, impact on operations. Of course, going to a work from home environment, that impacted everybody's operations, right? So, but most responded that they did not have to furlough or lay off their employees. However, most agencies had to quickly transfer to the work from home environment because that was not the norm in our industry. Some agencies were in states that deemed them essential businesses. So they were able to have a staff inside the office, but for the most part, they were working from home. So the operations were impacted because we needed to get laptops and headsets and telephones and transfer the work that way. Another impact on operations was the licensing. So the different states had different requirements. Case in point, Nevada. Nevada put a moratorium on collections. A little lesser of a requirement, Illinois, the state that I'm in. If you were working from home in Illinois and your collectors were working from home, you had to give the state the name and the address of every collector that was working from home within a certain time period. So the impact was on operations and on placement of accounts. Now, association-wise, the impact was great. Why? Because it gave us an opportunity to band together, but not only as agencies, but also with state regulators, with other associations, and became a unified voice. We at the association became more of a safety net. It was a place where agencies got together on a regular basis. In fact, Credit Safe was on a webinar for us. And the agencies came together, they talked, they networked. Anybody who has ever heard of a Commercial Collection Agencies of America meeting knows that the networking is great. We even continued that in this environment.
It's very, very cool. So kicking this off, Katie, I'd love to hear your thoughts in a similar vein. Like, what are you hearing from collection agencies in terms of the impact from COVID-19? And, you know, as we said, even before we had a little pre-conversation, it's kind of COVID-19 plus. There's just so much going on these days.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, it's definitely COVID-19 plus. So I would agree, and I've heard the same thing as Annette. So we've got the state level, you know, where there's different licensing, different rules. And I think the pivot to work from home was probably the biggest challenge. I would say that the agencies have given me feedback that they are still waiting to see what the impact is on revenue, and placements haven't yet necessarily gone down where they were expecting, but they're definitely concerned about the ability to collect just from the businesses having the money to pay, not necessarily whether they're allowed to collect. And so I have worked with Annette's group and very fond of them, and think, you know, there's no better time to be a part of an agency group like that, where you have the camaraderie and the networking and the support. I think that these agencies need to have that so that they're working together, not against each other. But definitely from the agency perspective, the placements haven't yet fallen off. There is still that TBD. And I think there's going to be that TBD for a while. You know, 90 to 120 in the future will be an interesting. I wish I had a crystal ball. I'll say that probably more than once today, because I get asked that question. I get asked the question of, you know, are we reacting? Are we doing the right thing? And I said, you know, if you feel that you're working to accommodate your collectors and you feel like you're working to accommodate your clients, then yes, you're doing the right thing. And then I would also say, from an operations standpoint, you know, definitely the work from home thing was challenging. I've had a number of agencies tell me that they got to get the computers ordered as quickly as possible. They had to get internet for some of their collectors. Not everybody, I know it sounds so foreign, but you believe it or not, there's a lot of people that don't have internet yet at home, or had to increase their speed because they couldn't support the network at home once they were VPNing into the system. And then technology was the next play, which is how to monitor and ensure that the agents were as active, because let's face it, we're all working from home and we've got the kids there, we've got the spouses there, the partners, and you have those interruptions. So to make sure that the clients were having their debt collected on in the same fashion from the office as they were from home is, you know, one of the big challenges I heard.
It all makes good sense. It's really interesting how, you know, a lot of the stuff you guys, I'm hearing from you, I've seen at Credit Safe as well, whether it's the work from home being such a massive impact, whereas the services within our worlds aren't as potentially heavily impacted as many other industries, right? There are so many, I think we obviously know, there's so many companies out there hurting right now. And, you know, I see it more on retail as the most visual for me locally. But, you know, what is the sense from the collection agencies? Like I'm kind of hearing overall that it's going to be fine within that industry, correct? Would you guys both agree with that? You have thoughts on that? Like,
you know, overall, the agencies are confident that they're going to be just fine. the agencies that are part of the association are tenured. So although this is a novel situation, the agencies have traversed difficult times previously. So this is not something that is foreign to them. Now, you know, some comments that I heard from our agencies are, well, sure, you know, the agencies that are well capitalized will fare the best, or, you know, it depends on the economy. It depends on what the economy does. But I'm confident, and the overwhelming message I heard was, yes, absolutely, they will be just fine.
Wonderful.
So I'll chime in on that. Yeah, I'll definitely chime in on that, Dustin, because I'm actually getting a little bit of a different message. And I will say that Annette's group is, you know, the high caliber agencies, and, you know, they are tenured. So I think they have that safety net. I've definitely heard of agencies that are for sale. I know several agencies that have had to put their agencies up because they just cannot weather this storm. I've also had some agencies reach out and say, you know, do you know anybody that would be interested in helping to recapitalize the business, whether, you know, fund them, give them extra loans, and that kind of thing. So I think I've got more of a mixed bag than maybe Annette does, just because I'm getting feedback from a mix of calibers, what I'll say, mix of size agencies. And not all of them are going to weather the storm, unfortunately, just like any business. I think that's a real thing that we're looking at. Not everybody's going to weather the storm. And so the best probably will, and the ones that are able to persevere, but there's definitely some that are looking to hit the escape button, and several that are for sale at this point.
Very cool. So, you know, kind of just to give a little bit of overall for the audience, like I should also say, please feel free to throw questions in the Q&A. From where I am thinking of it, I've got a list of questions here I know I want to get at. I'm going to go into trends next and just kind of say, what are some of the trends we're seeing, whether it's tech or data or other trends in the industry. I then wanted to kind of go into this more of a corporate exec hat and say, like, what are best practices you should be taking to kind of avoid collections, to kind of like, knowing that lots of companies are having cash flow issues. And then for the final bit of my questions are mostly around looking into that crystal ball, like what does the future look like? So I thought I would just kind of set the stage as we're just getting into this now. In terms of where I'm planning to go with the question. So with that said, I'd love to go into trends, and Katie, this time I'd love to start with you. What are some of the trends you're seeing of things that have changed, either how they're using data or technology or integrations? Like, do you think there'll be some major trends that will come out of just kind of learnings, if nothing else, from the last few months?
Yeah, absolutely. I've talked to a couple of the very large agencies I've been in contact with very frequently, and staffing and hiring 100 plus more collectors in preparation for the increased placements, is just not necessarily an option for everyone. So they're really looking at that digital arm, looking at the technology that's out there, looking to upgrade their technology and to bring more automation into play. I've heard a lot about that virtual collector, IVRs, just trying to touch the debt without having a physical person touch it is probably the number one thing right now that's out there. And there's a lot of great technology. I've had the pleasure of seeing a lot of it. And there's a lot of great technology that I would encourage all the agencies, if they can, to really consider maybe not putting all of the eggs in the basket of hiring at this point, because you don't know what the other side of this is going to look like, and to look at touching more with less. I think that's always going to make us more efficient. I would love to hear Annette's perspective on this, though, as well.
Sure, absolutely. So, commercial agencies, I think, are at least our agencies are at the forefront of technology, utilizing their technology to maximize their operations, including AI. So they are already implementing, and they have been already implementing those steps, which has made them fare well. Now go back to, when I said that they should be well capitalized. An agency that's well capitalized will be able to continue to step it up with their technology, with the technology that they use in their firms. one of the requirements, we look at how an agency is situated technologically. So that's one of our requirements that our standards board is looking at even increasing. And given this situation, there will be a lot of support for that.
It makes complete sense. I would love to dive in. Are there any, I'd love to hear just more thoughts on just like the actual tech that is being implemented. Like you guys have mentioned some really interesting thing, that kind of like that virtual collector or the AI and these kinds of things. Like, what does that look like in practice? If you wouldn't mind kind of giving me a sense of how is AI, we'll start there, being used within the industry to help, make the practices more efficient.
Well,
Yeah.
like call analytics and call recording certainly is where, a preliminary step. So the call analytics, also the virtual collector, that is something that our agencies are looking into. They might not have implemented it completely yet, but they're certainly on the road to doing that. Perhaps Katie has a comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm hearing a lot about digital strategy, and what that means is basically taking, your notices or your letters and moving them to be email, SMS. Obviously we're in the commercial game, so we don't necessarily run up so much against some of the stuff that the consumer agencies run up against. And I know a lot of agencies, especially a couple of large ones that I've been talking to, are looking at getting those digital touches in via email, SMS, IVR, and the ability to touch them with a different voice. And what I mean by that is come across with having that empathy, which is hard to do when you're not actually a person on the phone, but it has to do with your choice of verbiage, how you come across with your options, payment plans, making sure that there are a number of options, not just one. And then really kind of, appealing to the business of, hey, I've helped businesses like you clear up this debt, get to the other side of it. I want to help you. Help me help you by communicating with me. Let's figure out what amount we can get you on a weekly or monthly schedule to get this cleaned up over time. And I think that that's really what that digital strategy is trying to do, and enhance the collector itself in the office or at home that's making those phone calls, because the communication, having that tag team is really the magic.
Sure. And another idea is what we see our agencies doing is using that AI to scrub the accounts prior to the placement of the accounts. So that's minimizing the expense later on and getting rid of those dead accounts. So, that's maximizing their performance and saving a ton of money.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I keep wanting to go, ooh, we're doing similar things, and like CreditSafe is always trying to figure out, like, we're helping people make smarter decisions or automate processes. We had a whole webinar on autonomous decisioning and stuff like that last week, right? The webinar last week we had. So it's interesting because I think I'm of course living in our world, and it's interesting to hear the parallels that as you guys talk about them from a tech and just a tech perspective and how do you use these things. Anyway, it's really fun. I keep wanting to interrupt going, well, really, but this isn't about credit. This is about collection. So I should just let you guys go because this is where you know it. But there's so many parallels. I'm sure lots of companies that are, experiencing similar things. So now I wanted to turn a little bit just towards something more for like an exec or somebody, who's in the more credit management space, kind of the ones who are helping make decisions. What are some best practices so that they can just avoid getting into collections, especially knowing that, there's a lot of cash flow issues out there for so many companies right now. And, the companies, they want to keep working with other companies. Like the idea that you just stop working with people because you're afraid they're not going to pay, that's not a viable solution for most companies either, right? So how do we kind of get ourselves out of that morass, and what best practices do you recommend?
So we consulted with our platinum partner and yours also, the Credit Research Foundation. And we talked to Bill Bauduino and his team, and we asked these questions, and they gave us 4 salient points. The first one was assess the customer. Is it a single purchase, or is this a regular customer? Then look at the industry that the customer is in. If that industry is not going to prevail in this economy, it doesn't matter whether it's a good customer. And the credit practitioner might want to take a more aggressive approach. So number one, assess the customer. Number two, look at the industry. Those are going to plan how you deal with the customer. So when you deal with the customer, you have to ask yourself, what is the cost of outsourcing? What's it going to cost me to place an account with an agency? But conversely, what's it going to cost me internally to hold on to that account a little bit longer? So a creditor may not only look at the financial cost when they're talking about internally, but they're looking at how much time and effort he's going to spend monitoring that bad account. Obviously, if they choose a certified agency, it's more advantageous. They have to look at their margins. If it's a larger margin, then perhaps they can afford to hold the account a little bit longer. If they're working on smaller margins, then maybe that aggressive approach again. And finally, the fourth point, as a credit manager, look at your go-to market strategy. What is your company's reputation? Do you have a reputation that you litigate after a certain dollar amount? Do you have a conservative nature? So the creditor's reputation is certainly a consideration of how, and the company's philosophy is going to craft their approach on how they deal with the slow paying customer.
It's really interesting. Like there's so many things as I hear you say that I go, oh, that's really, there's a lot of things that of course CreditSafe is trying to do to address those things, right? But like you're so relevant, you're going, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Those are 4 great points. Katie, I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of, on that topic.
Yeah, so I'm going to take a totally different perspective because I think Annette's points were really valid and really help from the creditor standpoint. But I'm going to put myself in the shoes of the person that owes the money because I think we want to have both perspectives. So the company that is in, struggling, looking at things and having difficult times, but hasn't experienced this in the past, how do you handle calling your, supplier, calling your vendor? Because I think that's probably a perspective we want to talk about as well. One of the things I would say is pick up the phone and call your supplier or call your vendor, because the biggest mistake that I hear often is to not communicate. Like, I'm just going to go hide under a rock and weather this storm. And that is absolutely going to turn that supplier, that vendor into, you're not communicating. We're not getting anything from you. So I'm going to actually turn you over to the collection agency faster. So I would say first thing is pick up the phone and make the initial phone call. Second thing is really look at your expenses and look at what can you afford to give them. And if you can give them something every single week, maybe you're going to have to hold on the next couple of orders to make that happen. But go ahead and put something in place that's a small payment you can commit to that over time will get you caught up. And I think from a supplier or vendor's perspective, definitely be eyes and ears open to that, because by helping them get through this storm, the loyalty and the rapport you're going to build with that customer, you'll have them for life. And I've experienced that firsthand. And my third piece of advice would be to look at doing kind of a hybrid model, which is have the customer pay COD or at the point of ordering for their future orders, and have them pay that small weekly amount towards the debt. And that way you're still getting that business, you're still working with them, because let's face it, a lot of these businesses, if they can't get their stuff out the door, they can't really supply these orders, they're not going to be able to make their payments. So you have to come up and you got to be open-minded to giving them, a payment plan to get the old stuff cleared up or the past due, and then also kind of cutting the well, not having the bleed continue by taking, a prepayment or on cash on delivery for the future orders, just until they're able to get caught up. Again, giving them options, reaching out, having those conversations, it'll go a long way.
You know, you reminded me to talk about reaching out. One of the things that comes to my mind is even previously when you talk about everyone's working from home, and so many companies are so hard to get a hold of today, or so much harder than they just were 3 months ago. You know, like people aren't obviously getting their either print mail, their letters at the office. They're not, you know, getting the calls at the office to nearly the same extent. So what you said about communication, it's always one of those things that's going to come up. I've heard it in the past, but it's even, you know, I was going to say doubly important. It's 10x important right now, when there's a good chance that as a business, you're just much harder to get a hold of right now for anybody.
That's a theme that we heard when we surveyed our agencies as well, because, you know, it's the creativity, right? Whether you're sitting in a credit practitioner seat or you're sitting as a collector in a collection agency, your creativity will lend itself to your further success, right? So we talk about it's hard to get a hold of the debtors, right? Because they're out of their office. So our agents are using the voicemail a lot more. Okay, what's another way that they can get a hold of the business owner that's not even at the business location? So if the more creative they are, open communication, like Katie said, it will go a long way.
I love it. This is so great. And I think the next area I wanted to go to was just thinking of resources for people. I think there are so many companies who, you know, I'm sure many companies have cash flow issues at one spot, but where it hasn't been the limiting factor per se, right? It hasn't stopped them, or like they're not getting their cash that they normally do in this B2B space. What are some resources you would recommend for, you know, people who are kind of, you know, a little bit going, what should I do now? I'm in more trouble than my business has ever been in before. I'm scared. Where would you recommend they go to get either education or help? Like, do you guys have some resources in mind?
So I would recommend first reaching out and looking at the government programs that are out there. There's a lot of small business loans and money out there for, you know, grants and scholarships that they can get these businesses. So I think reaching out to your local, state, and federal to find out what kind of programs are out there, looking at the small business. And then my third piece would be to reach out to the smaller firms, you know, the credit unions. There's a lot of good smaller banks, you know, Blue Vine's one that comes to mind right off the top of my mind that is lending right now. And you want to find those because, again, they'll help you get on the other side of this. And I think that'll go a long way.
And I would echo what Katie said on the debtor side. On the credit practitioner side and on the collection side, we also have to educate ourselves. So I would look to industry. I mean, we have Commercial Collection Training Institute. We have a class for credit grantors that was just rolled out in the last 6 months. I mentioned the Credit Research Foundation. I mean, that is an association, a composite of B2B risk management professionals. They've got a cross section of classes, and they have open forums that you can go to. So the debtor is, you know, the funding for the debtor is one thing, but also the resources for the credit practitioner and the collection agency is another way to look at it.
For sure. I know that we've never had such success at getting people to even show up for webinars, but I think people working from home, they can maybe might just get less distracted during the middle of the day, or like they put something in their calendar and it sits. Like it's a great time for education right now. I can tell you our webinars, I've normally feel lucky if we get 30% of the people show up who say they're going to go to a webinar. We're often at 70. We've had some that have had like close to 100% of the people show up who say they're going to show up. And that just blows my mind. But I think it also plays to the work from home situation we're in, and just people's ability to, you know, commit to education.
Yeah, I think there's a thirst for that. I think there's certainly a thirst for the professional to further educate themselves, no matter in what discipline.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. So the last kind of theme I wanted to go to was that crystal ball element. I know we were laughing at that a couple of times so far, even before in our little pre-chats and whatnot. But, looking like, looking into our crystal ball, Annette, I'd love for you to maybe start and just say, what is it going to look like a few months from now? I'm thinking in the fall. There's everything from potential for like second wave to really hit. There's who knows, but like, what's it going to kind of look like in the collection industry in the fall? What do you see?
So, like I said before, although this is a new situation, we have had some experience with a less than favorable economic situation. So while I don't have a crystal ball, what I would say is that our agencies overall are optimistic. They're going to see, and it depends on the credit, that it's the extension of credit. If that's constricted, then we are going to see less placements, right? So, but with regard to the progression, we may see less placements. We may see an onslaught of placements, and then it goes down. And then we have to address the recovery rates. And that, I think, is where we are going to see something that we haven't seen before because of the extent of the unemployment. Now, looking a year, you had mentioned before, maybe in the pre-chat, about looking a year from now. What are we going to see in a year from now? There are so many things that need to be considered. That second wave that you said. We don't know if and when that second wave is going to come. We believe that it will. We need to see where the dollar's at. We have to remember that later on this year, we have federal, state, and local elections. That certainly is going to impact our situation. And finally, the unemployment rates. That is a determining factor also. So I wish I had that crystal ball too, because I probably would be on a beach in Maui, retired. But I don't think it's completely unknown. But to the extent of it, I think that's where the question mark lies.
Completely. Katie, what are your thoughts as you look into your crystal ball?
Yeah, I definitely look at it every night. So definitely, I think there's going to be increased placements. I'm willing to bet on it. I've said that out loud. I think the increased placements are coming. I think that there was a lot of initial businesses, and I'm sure the agencies would probably share, where people weren't pulling the trigger as fast as they normally would. So they were still having their normal placements, but they were giving the customer that they had that relationship more of the benefit of the doubt and held on to it a little too long. I think there's going to be some blowback from that, if I'm honest. I do think that the fall, we've got the election coming up. That's definitely going to play a role in what this looks like. I think we've got the unemployment rate. I would 100% agree with Annette on, still plays a role in it. And then I also think we've got this, does the lockdowns and, all of the measures come back? Do they come back with a vengeance? Do they come back, in a hybrid version? What does that look like? Because when we don't have businesses operating, there's definitely a domino effect to that. I've had a lot of economic conversations, even with friends of mine recently, where I was saying, and we were talking about the school districts. Let me tell you where some of that funding comes from. It comes from us all going out to eat and going shopping and doing those things locally. And if we're not doing that, they don't have the money to pay the taxes. And you can't just send them a bill and say, hey, the last 5 years, this is on average what you've contributed to the school district. This is why we're seeing our school districts asking for money. So I think that we definitely have to look at the fact of the macroeconomics of this, which is there's a lot of micro things and even some macro things that are going to play a role. And I do wish I had a crystal ball, but I don't.
Don't we all?
Yes.
So we have 2 questions that have come in. I'd like to go to Q&A here before we wrap it up. And so the first one comes from Adele. He asks, in such situations, is it important for the creditors to look into the credit limits for their customers? Like, what are they using credit scores and credit reports in this process?
I would say 100%. 100%. If they're not looking at them, they should be looking at them, and now even with more scrutiny.
Yeah, absolutely. That was my answer to the same question. I've told people, if you don't have a credit policy, get one written today and make sure that you're looking at it with more scrutiny would be my advice as well. We need to look at not just one model of it. I love the COVID-19 impact score that came out into the marketplace. I've been talking about that a lot to people. So I would really encourage to be buckling down and buttoning up your credit policy, and definitely the credit limit for sure.
And, to add what Katie said, a lot of credit practitioners not only have a credit policy, but they have a collection policy, and they're separate. So I would encourage practitioners to go back and look at that credit policy. If you don't have a collection policy, certainly now is a great time to establish one.
That makes good sense. I keep going back to that webinar that we did last week in my mind as you guys are talking. I've been trying not to say it too much, but there was a really interesting one around credit policies. It had to do with autonomous decisions, but just a lot of companies can benefit from that. And like you said, it's very related to the collection policy as well, but just documenting it, and the benefits are multifold in terms of, there's a lot of benefits you get. Saving time can be one thing, but it can be more than that. It can also just be kind of covering your butt, for lack of a better way of saying it. Like, okay, this is how we treat these kinds of customers, and standardizing that. There's just a certain fairness that makes a lot of companies can benefit from as they document that credit policy and really understand it and iterate on it in times like this. Like, then there's a time for a credit policy, but then there's a time to adjust it as well and go, okay, situation changes.
Absolutely.
What do we need to do? So very much appreciate that. Another question came from Robin. She asked, are agencies seeing an increase in first-party collection placements or just third-party? And has there been an increase in companies just starting first-party collections versus prior years?
It's a good question. And thanks to Robin for asking it. We are seeing an increase in first-party, and I'm sure Katie, she's nodding her head, so I'm assuming she is too. And also, to go even further than that, some of the resources that are used in first party are now being used in third party. So that was an answer that we got as well from our agencies.
I'm gonna let it go with Annette, because I 100% agree and have heard the exact same thing.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, I really appreciated this. I've loved this conversation. Annette and Katie, I really want to thank you so much. Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to share with the audience before we sign off?
One other thought that I heard on a webinar, it's got to be probably 6 weeks ago, is that while the fees and the revenue might be great now, our agencies need to be focused on their placements, because 3, 6, 9, 12 months from now, their placements are going to be what is important. And we would encourage credit practitioners to really look at everything that we've talked about and place the claims with the agencies when they deem appropriate. But that's what I would add. Katie?
Yeah, I would definitely say now's the time to pivot, in the sense of don't hold on to your debt for too long. I'm always a big proponent. I love the agency. I love the agency model. And I like to know that they are the experts and the professionals. And if I've done my collections process to the best of my ability, whether it's 60 days or 90 days, I'm confident that I'm turning it over and they're going to be able to collect on it. And just because they collect on it, for our credit listeners on the phone, does not mean that your collections team is not good at what they do. It just means that those experts, there's a reason there's collection agencies out there. It's because we need them. And so let your collectors go on to doing more of the smile and dial, working what they do best, and don't hold on to that debt for too long. It could bite you in the butt.
Well, I do want to thank you from everyone at Credit Safe here. Thank you both. This has been a really informative and helpful conversation. We're having another panel tomorrow, another conversation tomorrow with George Bresler of GB Collect. So if people want more on the collection, please join us on tomorrow's webinar, as well as we're just constantly spinning out more of these webinars. We have a really interesting, I'm really looking forward to one we're having in 2 weeks on with a somebody who runs a credit agency out of China. We're going to be able to dive into those. So lots of different topics. We're always trying to bring something new and innovative. And if you have something to add, don't hesitate to reach out to the Credit Safe team to suggest topics, or if you want more information from any of these speakers, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help do that. So with that said, thank you both so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure, Dustin. Thank you.
I really
Always a
did
pleasure.
enjoy this.
Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you so much. I'm going to sign off now. Thank you all so much.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.